It seems like Keynes was involved on both sides of that. Like, as you just said, right? His book was written in Nazi Germany. He liked that. He was consulting the British government, also the United States government, right? And he was instrumental in the Bretton Woods Agreement. And during that Bretton Woods Agreement, he kind of came up with like that Bancor system, which was, it seemed like his idea was, maybe to your point, get rid of the gold standard and then have like that neutral reserve asset that like maybe never came to fruition. And now we see today, like the IMF's calling for a Bretton Woods 2 moment. And we hear talk of this like IMF, like an SDR basket, which maybe they have thoughts of like having trying to do his original idea, which is have that neutral reserve asset. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's a non-starter as an idea. It's unworkable, and I think it's unworkable on many levels. The first is the political level, which is why it didn't work in the Bretton Woods Agreement, because we had this essentially, this British aristocrat who'd never worked a real job in their life, who's just always been out there living in his world of fantasy and pontificating about how the world should work. You had this delusional muppet turn up at a meeting of the world leaders and saying, "Hey, we're going to get rid of gold. We're going to get rid of all of your money. And we're going to issue this new paper token that me and my buddies at Cambridge have come up with. And essentially, I am going to be on a committee of a bunch of my friends who are going to decide how much money everybody else in the world has."
Hmm.
And you can obviously see where the problems happen with that. Well, the first problem is that you run up against the United States, which has just won the war, has the majority of the world's gold, and has the world's most powerful military. And why would they give you the power to print all of that money? So obviously the US said, no thanks. We're just going to build this around our own money, which we can print, which,
Right.
we control. And so the program, the result of the Bretton Woods Agreement was the program of Harry Dexter White, who was an American communist, self-confessed communist, and some people say he was a Soviet spy, and he was investigated for being a Soviet spy, and he killed himself during the investigation. But I think it's more accurate not to say that he's a Soviet spy, in as much as he is just a local, homegrown American communist, and these people were quite influential at that time in the U.S. And it was their communist idea to just turn the U.S. into the world's central bank, and that was the idea that succeeded. So I think it's extremely naive to imagine that we could have monetary policy handed to a group of experts. It's naive to pretend that you are a neutral expert that can just take over something like monetary policy and run it like you're running a machine, when it's obviously something political. And it's not just political, it's you're allocating economic resources. If you decide to print money in order to give this government money so that it can fight a war, whereas you don't give the other government money so that it doesn't fight the war, then you're picking the winner of the war. So it's an inherently political question, and it's not something that can be just wished away. So that's the first issue. And the second economic reason why this is unworkable in my mind is that you can't just come up with this thing called Bancor and tell the world, hey, all of your money doesn't work anymore. All of the things that you value, all of your gold, your dollars, your yuans, and your euros, all of that is zero now. Don't use it. Turn it in, and we'll give you Bancors instead. Like, it's you cannot really do that. It's never happened. People use the term fiat money, and there is truth to the term fiat money, but there's never been a real fiat currency. This has never happened that somebody just went and said, "Hey, I've printed 1 billion of my coin, and here you go, accept it. This is the value, and this is the price of it." This has just never happened. Anybody who's ever issued a currency has had to back it by something in order for it to gain a value on the market. So
Right.
what you do is effectively you create a market in your currency with the other currency. So what most countries today do is they do that with gold, with dollars. Before, it used to be done with gold. So you gather a bunch of gold. If you have a bunch of gold, you can issue paper backed by that gold and make it redeemable in the gold. And then people will use your paper because they know they can get it redeemed in gold.
Right.
Similarly, today they do the same thing with dollars. You go to your central bank, you can exchange your local shitcoin for dollars. But So the notion that we can just get the entire planet to agree to dump their currencies and to give value to something is nonsensical. I think what's more likely to happen, I think there will be some element of something like this happening, is that we're going to basically replace national currencies by an international central bank digital currency. But more likely, I think, well, I think, this is already happening nationally, but I think more significantly is that, excuse me, the reserve asset backing those central bank digital currencies is going to be something like a central banker's digital currency, which is used
Right.
among central banks themselves. So something like the IMF's SDRs right now. But what's going to happen is that, I mean, the IMF SDRs are essentially backed by US dollars because the IMF has a credit line from the Federal Reserve. So I think what would be likely to happen is essentially national governments turn in their currencies and transform their currencies into this international central bank currency. And then that currency is managed by, I mean, I guess this is really the interesting question that we're going to be seeing play out. If we still lived in a world that was dominated by the US, then I could see this being just a more modern way of running the dollar system, wherein the US just says, all right, instead of having paper dollars and running it on the SWIFT network and using the Federal Reserve's payment settlement system, we're going to introduce those new cryptographic based settlement systems, and everything is going to be centralized with the US in the middle, the US in charge, essentially formalizing and making the Bretton Woods system more efficient without gold backing. This is how I would imagine, if this kind of technology was available 20 or 30 years ago, I think this is the direction that we would have gone in. But now things are much more interesting because China is, primarily because of China, but also to a lesser extent Europe, they're not going to be crazy excited about joining a new dollar system. And so more likely what they're going to be pushing for is some kind of either a multilateral system in which the base layer money is jointly run by the US and China and maybe Europe, maybe some few other smaller economies here and there, getting like votes on a monetary policy board. But I think we're more likely to see monetary competition with the Chinese essentially attempting to bring about their own national currency to make it into the global reserve currency, because it doesn't really make sense to have a global reserve currency run by two governments, particularly governments that are essentially rival for
Right.
the position of world leadership. Now, given the way that things have unfolded over the last couple of years in the world economy, with the way that international cooperation has taken place around the coronavirus crisis, and the way that basically everybody marched to the tune of the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum, you can see this kind of thing being implemented in national currencies as well. You could see perhaps we'll get something like this. And I think one hypothesis I have is that, as inflation begins to pick up, the central bank digital currency narrative is going to be marketed as the solution for the inflation problem. And so, your dollars and euros and yens and yuans are devaluing not because of your government spending and printing a lot of money, obviously, because that's crazy conspiracy theory
Yeah.
talk. Obviously supply has nothing to do with demand, right?
Right.
No, that's not it. Your currency is tanking in price because it's physical and it's ancient 20th century technology. And Bitcoin is rising in price because it's digital and it's advanced 21st century technology. So we're going to copy Bitcoin's technology and use cryptography in order to prevent the value of your national currency from declining. So I can see this kind of pitch being given, and people being given their new digital currencies, which are going to, do the old Latin American trick where you just rename your currency and take off a bunch of zeros. So
Yeah.
I remember in Brazil they had the Cruzeiro, and then they had the Novo Cruzeiro, the new Cruzeiro, and then they had the Cruzado and the Novo Cruzado. I think it was the other way around. The Cruzados came first. But yeah, and then they went to the Real, and now the Real is beginning to fall apart, and I'm sure soon they'll introduce the Novo Real. So it'll be like the new dollar or the digital dollar or something like that. And uh, people will think, all right, well, now this will fix the inflation problem because this will copy the digital technology that will protect us from this crazy inflation bug that we suffer from. But I don't see that as being a sustainable solution, because I think you'll get, the U.S. is not nothing. There's an enormous amount of trade that is based around the U.S. So you're still going to have the Chinese and the U.S. and the Europeans trying to make their currencies be the world currency, but they would all, they would all like it if they were the ones who have produced the global reserve currency. But they can all live with it if the global reserve currency was one that was not issued by either of the other two.
Right.
And therefore, they could all tolerate something like Bitcoin.